In the heart of downtown, where the city's elite came to see and be seen, there stood the Bistro, an upscale restaurant with ambient lighting, elegant decor, and prices that made most people save it for special occasions. Comment where you're watching from today as we dive into this incredible true story. For 3 years, Olivia Parker had been a fixture at the Bistro, her quick smile and efficient service making her popular with the regular clientele. At 27, with student loans still looming over her head from her political science degree, Olivia took pride in her work, despite it not being her dream career. She'd always imagined herself working for a progressive political campaign or a social justice nonprofit, but the job market had other plans. She consoled herself with the knowledge that at least the Bistro's generous tipping culture helped keep her afloat financially. Behind Olivia's professional demeanor lay a passionate advocate. Friends knew her as someone who consumed political news voraciously, participated in weekend protests, and engaged in heated debates on social media. Her apartment walls were adorned with posters promoting various causes, and her laptop was covered in stickers proclaiming her beliefs. For Olivia, there was no separating the personal from the political. Everything was connected. What her managers at the Bistro had noticed, however, was Olivia's tendency to sort customers into mental categories based on subtle cues. A certain watch brand, a comment about property taxes, or even the type of car visible through the front windows when they pulled up. She'd developed an almost uncanny ability to predict a person's political leanings within minutes of serving them, and though she tried to maintain professionalism, her warmth noticeably diminished when serving those she perceived as being on the wrong side of issues she cared about. Remember, Olivia, we serve everyone with the same level of attention, regardless of who they are or what they believe. Marcus, the restaurant manager, had reminded her more than once after noticing her coldness toward certain patrons. The Bistro has a reputation for discretion and excellent service. That's why people come back. Olivia would nod dutifully at these reminders, but privately believed that some viewpoints didn't deserve the same respect as others. Still, she needed this job, and the flexible scheduling allowed her to volunteer for causes she believed in during her days off. So she'd smile, albeit sometimes tightly, and continue bringing expensive wines and artfully plated dishes to tables of people she sometimes secretly disdained. You can't judge a book by its cover, her mother had always told her, but Olivia privately thought this wisdom outdated. In her experience, wealthy patrons who spoke dismissively about handouts or complained about tax rates were exactly who they appeared to be: privileged individuals disconnected from the struggles of everyday Americans. On this particular Tuesday evening, the Bistro was moderately busy with its usual mix of business dinners, wealthy couples, and the occasional celebration. Olivia moved efficiently between her assigned tables, balancing plates along her arm with practiced ease while maintaining her professional smile. She'd already mentally categorized most of her tables: the finance bros discussing market trends, conservative likely, the professors from the local university, liberal almost certainly, the older couple quietly celebrating what looked like an anniversary. Harder to tell, but the woman's "I voted" tote bag suggested left-leaning. "Olivia, I need you to take table 12, Marcus said, approaching her as she input an order at the terminal. Janet had to leave. Family emergency. But I already have 5 tables, Olivia protested, glancing at the clock. It was peak dinner hour, and she'd been hoping to finish her shift without additional stress. I know, and I'm sorry, but we're short-staffed tonight. Table 12 just sat down. Looks like just one person, shouldn't be too demanding. I'll see if I can get someone else to help with your other tables. Olivia sighed, but nodded, quickly finishing the order before straightening her black apron and heading toward table 12 in the corner, one of the more secluded spots in the restaurant, often requested by patrons seeking privacy or those looking to avoid being recognized. As she approached, Olivia mentally prepared herself for another interaction, another performance of the perfect waitress. Attentive, but not intrusive, friendly, but not familiar. When she practiced these small moments of detachment, she could almost hear her former psychology professor discussing the concept of emotional labor, the work of managing one's feelings to fulfill the emotional requirements of a job. For service workers like her, this meant constantly projecting warmth, regardless of how they actually felt. What Olivia didn't know as she walked toward table 12 was that this particular guest would challenge her assumptions, push her to confront her own prejudices, and ultimately change the trajectory of her life. The universe had a lesson prepared for her about snap judgments and looking beyond the surface, a lesson delivered by one of the most unlikely teachers in Hollywood. In the soft lighting of the bistro, with its white tablecloths and crystal glassware creating an atmosphere of understated luxury, Olivia was about to serve someone who would turn her world upside down. Someone who, despite his fame and fortune, understood more about genuine compassion and seeing beyond political differences than she had yet to learn. Someone whose quiet philosophy of life would make her question everything she thought she knew about people with wealth and influence. Little did Olivia know that her habit of categorizing people would soon be put to the ultimate test, and that the consequences of her assumptions would ripple far beyond a single dinner service. The restaurant continued its evening rhythm, the gentle clink of silverware against fine china, the murmur of conversations, the occasional burst of laughter, unaware that it was about to become the setting for a profound encounter between two people from vastly different worlds. As she reached table 12, Olivia put on her professional smile, ready to greet yet another patron of the bistro. "Good evening," she prepared to say, unaware that these words would be the beginning of an extraordinary story, one that would eventually reach millions of people online and spark conversations about kindness, assumptions, and the danger of judging others too quickly in our increasingly divided world. The Tuesday evening crowd at the bistro continued its steady hum of conversation when the front door opened, admitting a cool breeze and a solitary figure. The man who entered was dressed casually. Dark jeans, a well-worn leather jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. A beard, thicker and more unkempt than what might be expected at such an establishment, obscured much of his face. Despite his understated appearance, there was something in his demeanor that caught the attention of the hostess. A quiet confidence, perhaps, or the way he carried himself with both humility and assurance. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the bistro." The hostess greeted him with the practiced warmth reserved for all guests. "Do you have a reservation?" "No, I'm sorry," the man replied in a gentle, almost melodic voice. "I was hoping you might have a quiet table available, something a bit secluded if possible." There was a hint of familiarity in his voice that made the hostess pause, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied his partially obscured face. Celebrity sightings weren't uncommon at the bistro, but most arrived with entourages or at least a personal assistant in tow. This man stood alone, seemingly preferring anonymity to attention. "Of course, sir. We have a lovely table in the corner that should offer you the privacy you're looking for. Please, follow me." As the hostess led him through the restaurant, a few diners glanced up, their expressions showing the same momentary recognition, followed by uncertainty. The man kept his head slightly down, offering polite smiles, but clearly not inviting conversation. The hostess seated him at table 12, the very table that had just been assigned to Olivia. "Your server will be with you shortly," the hostess informed him, lingering a moment longer than necessary before returning to her post, leaning in to whisper something to the bartender as she passed. Meanwhile, Olivia was delivering a bottle of expensive Cabernet to a table of business executives when she noticed the new arrival being seated in her section. From a distance, she could only make out his casual attire, distinctly underdressed compared to the bistro's usual clientele. She mentally added him to her growing list of responsibilities for the evening, wondering briefly why someone dressed so casually would choose one of the city's most expensive restaurants for a solitary dinner. When she finally approached table 12, notepad in hand and professional smile in place, Olivia was met with kind eyes, looking up from beneath the brim of the cap. "Good evening, I'm Olivia, and I'll be your server tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" she asked, her standard opening line delivered with practiced ease. "Just water for now, thank you," the man replied, his voice gentle and measured. "And maybe some recommendations for dinner? I'm afraid I haven't been here in quite some time." As he spoke, Olivia felt a prickling sensation of recognition. There was something about the voice, the eyes, the posture that seemed strikingly familiar. The beard and cap provided effective camouflage, but they couldn't completely disguise the man beneath them. Like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together, Olivia began to suspect she was serving someone of note, though she couldn't quite place him yet. "Of course," she replied, maintaining her professional demeanor while her mind raced. Our chef is particularly proud of the seared scallops with truffle risotto tonight. The grass-fed filet is also exceptional, served with a red wine reduction. The scallops sound perfect, he nodded, handing back the menu with a smile that transformed his entire face. It was warm, genuine, and oddly familiar. A smile she had seen before, perhaps on movie posters or magazine covers. As Olivia turned to place his order, she overheard a whispered conversation between two servers near the kitchen entrance. "I swear it's him," one was saying excitedly. "It's Keanu Reeves. He's growing out his beard for the new John Wick movie." Olivia nearly missed a step, glancing back at table 12 with new understanding. Keanu Reeves, the action star known as much for his humility and random acts of kindness as for his blockbuster films. Stories about his generosity circulated regularly online, accounts of him giving up his subway seat, starting cancer foundations without attaching his name, and taking pay cuts so other actors could be hired. Yet here he was, sitting alone at her table, dressed like an ordinary person and requesting a quiet dinner without fanfare. As she entered his order into the system, Olivia felt a flutter of excitement. Unlike many of her co-workers who might have gushed over a celebrity encounter, her interest was piqued more by the opportunity to potentially engage with someone whose political views might align with hers. Celebrities often use their platforms for advocacy, and though she couldn't recall specific causes Keanu had championed, his reputation for kindness suggested he might share some of her values. When she returned with his water, Olivia noticed he was scrolling through his phone, his expression thoughtful. He looked up when she approached, tucking the device away and giving her his full attention, a rare courtesy that many patrons didn't extend to service staff. "Your order will be ready shortly, Mr." Olivia caught herself before completing the sentence, unsure if acknowledging his identity would be welcome. "Just Keanu is fine," he replied with that same gentle smile, confirming her suspicions. "Thank you, Olivia." The fact that he remembered her name, a small detail that many patrons overlooked, didn't surprise her given the stories about his considerate nature. What did surprise her was how ordinary he seemed. No airs, no demands, no sense of entitlement that often accompanied wealth and fame. As the evening progressed, Olivia divided her attention between her tables, providing the same level of service to all, while finding herself increasingly curious about her famous guest. Keanu ate quietly, occasionally glancing up to observe the restaurant, but mostly keeping to himself. He was polite when she checked on him, but not particularly talkative, a man clearly accustomed to guarding his privacy in public spaces. From across the restaurant, Marcus watched with barely concealed interest, making eye contact with Olivia and giving her an encouraging nod. A celebrity sighting was always good for business, especially when the celebrity in question was known for his decency rather than diva behavior. Little did any of them know that this quiet dinner would soon take an unexpected turn, one that would challenge Olivia's perceptions and ultimately reveal connections between server and patron that neither could have anticipated. For now, though, the evening continued its elegant dance of service and consumption, with Keanu Reeves sitting unobtrusively in the corner, a humble presence in a restaurant accustomed to much more demanding displays of status and wealth. As the evening progressed, the bistro settled into its rhythm of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. Olivia moved efficiently between her tables, balancing the demands of the business executives who wanted constant attention and the quiet couple celebrating an anniversary who preferred to be left alone. Meanwhile, in the corner, Keanu Reeves enjoyed his scallops in relative anonymity, the restaurant's dim lighting and his own unassuming presence helping him blend in despite his fame. Olivia approached his table to check on his meal, professional but curious about the celebrity in her section. "How are you enjoying the scallops?" she asked, notepad ready in case he needed anything additional. "They're excellent," Keanu replied, looking up with that same genuine smile. "Compliments to the chef. This place has always had remarkable food." "You've been here before?" Olivia asked, momentarily forgetting her professional distance in her curiosity. "A few times over the years," he nodded. "I'm actually in town for a charity event tomorrow. The Foundation for Children's Arts is hosting a fundraiser to keep creative programs in underserved schools. These kinds of events usually come with fancy dinners, but sometimes I prefer something quieter beforehand." At the mention of the charity event, Olivia's interest was piqued. She'd always been passionate about education and arts funding, especially in disadvantaged communities. "That sounds like a wonderful cause," she commented, breaking her usual rule of keeping personal opinions out of customer interactions. Keanu nodded, seeming pleased by her interest. "It is, though there's been some pushback from certain quarters about the allocation of funds. Some people believe that arts education isn't essential compared to other subjects." He shook his head slightly. "I disagree. Creative expression is vital for children's development, regardless of their background." As he continued speaking, a nearby diner raised his voice slightly while on a phone call. "Well, if these liberal arts programs want funding, they should raise it privately instead of expecting taxpayers to foot the bill. That's all I'm saying." The timing couldn't have been worse. The loud comment from the other table merged with Keanu's words about certain quarters and pushback, creating a confusing impression in Olivia's mind. She caught only fragments of Keanu's next sentence, something about conservative estimates regarding the program's budget, but the word conservative stood out starkly to her politically attuned ears. A subtle shift occurred in Olivia's demeanor, nearly imperceptible, but present nonetheless. Her smile became slightly fixed, her posture a touch more rigid. In her mind, connections were being made. A wealthy celebrity discussing funding allocation and using terms like conservative estimates, while nodding along to a nearby comment about private funding rather than taxpayer support. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" she asked, her tone professionally correct, but noticeably cooler than before. The warm curiosity had vanished, replaced by the detached efficiency she reserved for patrons she'd mentally categorized as being on the opposite side of her political beliefs. If Keanu noticed the change, he gave no indication. "Just the check whenever you have a moment. No rush," he replied, seemingly unaware of the misunderstanding that had just taken place. As Olivia walked away to attend to her other tables, her thoughts raced. She'd admired Keanu Reeves based on the stories of his generosity, but now she wondered if those acts of kindness were more about tax write-offs than genuine compassion. The entertainment industry was full of wealthy individuals who presented one image publicly while quietly supporting policies that maintained inequality. Perhaps Keanu was one of them, another rich celebrity disconnected from the struggles of ordinary people like her. When she returned with his check, Keanu was on his phone, reading something with a thoughtful expression. He looked up as she approached and thanked her, but Olivia merely nodded curtly in response, placing the leather folder on the table with barely a glance at him. "You know," Keanu said conversationally as he reached for his wallet, "the most rewarding part of these events is seeing the children's faces when they realize someone believes in their potential. One young girl told me last year that the art program was the first time anyone had ever told her she was good at something." His expression was wistful, genuinely moved by the memory. Under normal circumstances, such a comment might have softened Olivia's perspective, but she was already committed to her interpretation. She heard his words through the filter of her assumptions. Another wealthy person feeling virtuous about charity, while likely voting for policies that created the need for charity in the first place. "Must be nice to pick and choose which social issues get your attention," she replied, the comment slipping out before she could filter it. Her tone was just shy of sarcastic, plausibly deniable as simple conversation, but carrying an unmistakable edge. Keanu looked up, mild surprise registering in his eyes. "I'm sorry?" Realizing she might have crossed a line, Olivia backpedaled slightly. "Nothing. Just commenting on how charitable events can be selective about which problems they address." "I suppose that's true of any effort," Keanu replied carefully. "No single initiative can solve everything, but that doesn't diminish the value of trying to help where you can." "Of course," Olivia said with a tight smile, taking the leather folder he handed back without opening it. "Have a good evening." As she walked away, Olivia felt a mix of emotions. Righteous indignation at what she perceived as hypocrisy, but also a nagging discomfort about her own behavior. She had built an entire narrative about Keanu's politics based on fragments of conversation and her own preconceptions. Still, she reasoned, people with wealth and privilege typically supported policies that protected that wealth and privilege. It was a pattern she'd observed countless times. At the register, she opened the check folder and paused. Keanu had left a 50% tip. far above the customary amount, even at an upscale establishment like the bistro. For a brief moment, doubt crept into her mind. Would someone truly disconnected from the struggles of service workers leave such a generous gratuity? But Olivia quickly rationalized it away. Celebrity tipping was often performative, a way to generate positive stories and maintain a benevolent public image. It didn't necessarily reflect genuine concern for working people's systemic challenges. As the evening continued, Olivia's service to Keanu remained professional, but distinctly cold. When he ordered coffee after his meal, she brought it promptly, but without the friendly check-ins she provided to her other tables. When he made a small joke about the dessert menu, she responded with a polite but hollow laugh, before quickly moving to another table. From across the restaurant, Marcus noticed the change in Olivia's demeanor. He'd seen this pattern before, her subtle withdrawal when she believed a patron held opposing political views. Usually, he would let it slide as long as her service remained technically adequate. But this was different. This was Keanu Reeves, and beyond that, he was one of the most genuinely decent celebrities known in the industry. Whatever assumptions Olivia was making, Marcus suspected they were wildly off base. Little did anyone in the restaurant know that this misunderstanding was about to escalate into a confrontation that would leave lasting impressions on everyone involved, especially Olivia, whose world was about to be turned upside down by the revelation of who Keanu Reeves truly was, not just as a celebrity, but as a person, and most surprisingly, as someone connected to the bistro in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. The bistro had begun to quiet as the evening wore on, with several tables already vacated and the remaining patrons settling into the comfortable lull of after-dinner drinks and subdued conversation. In the corner, Keanu continued to linger over his coffee, occasionally checking his phone, but mostly gazing thoughtfully around the restaurant, seemingly content in his solitude. Despite Olivia's coolness, he had made no complaints, tipping generously and maintaining his gentle demeanor throughout the evening. For Olivia, what had begun as an exciting discovery, serving a famous actor, had soured into a source of irritation. Each time she approached his table, her preconceptions solidified further. His expensive watch, his casual mention of multiple homes, his comments about the charity event that she had now fully interpreted as supporting privatized education rather than public funding. All of it painted a picture in her mind of exactly the type of wealthy elite she disdained. When Keanu requested another coffee, Olivia nodded curtly and turned to fulfill the order. At the service station, she found herself joined by another server, Dominic, who had been watching her interactions with the famous patron with increasing curiosity. "Everything okay with table 12? He asked quietly, nodding toward Keanu. "You seem a bit tense." "Fine," Olivia replied, pressing the buttons on the coffee machine with unnecessary force. "Just tired of celebrities who think throwing money at problems absolves them from supporting actual systemic change." Dominic raised an eyebrow. "What makes you think he doesn't support systemic change? Keanu Reeves has a pretty solid reputation." "Please," Olivia scoffed, keeping her voice low but unable to hide her disdain. "He's worth hundreds of millions. People with that kind of wealth don't get there by prioritizing social equality. They all talk about charity while voting for tax breaks and private interests." "That's a pretty broad generalization," Dominic commented, but Olivia had already picked up the coffee cup and was heading back to Keanu's table. As she approached, she overheard him on his phone, catching only a fragment of conversation. The foundation could definitely use the tax benefits from increased donations. The conservative approach would be to start small, but I think we should be more ambitious. That was it, the final confirmation in Olivia's mind. She placed the coffee down with a slight clatter, drawing Keanu's attention. He quickly ended his call with a "I'll call you back," and looked up with a polite smile. "Thank you," he said, reaching for the cup. "I appreciate your service tonight, despite how busy you've been." Perhaps it was his genuine tone, so at odds with the narrative she had constructed about him. Perhaps it was the accumulated frustration of years serving wealthy patrons who left generous tips while supporting policies she believed harmed working people like herself. Or perhaps it was simply the exhaustion of a long shift and the disappointment of discovering that someone she might have admired was, in her estimation, just another out-of-touch celebrity. Whatever the cause, Olivia's professional facade finally cracked. "You know," she said, her voice slightly louder than appropriate for the quiet restaurant, "it must be really nice to sit there and plan charity events that make you feel good about yourself while never having to worry about whether you can make rent next month." Keanu blinked, clearly taken aback by the sudden shift in tone. "I'm sorry. Have I done something to offend you?" "No, of course not," Olivia continued, her words flowing now that the dam had broken. "You're just like every other rich celebrity who talks about helping people while completely disconnected from reality. Do you have any idea what it's like to work for tips? To have no health care? To watch rich people argue about tax benefits for their foundations while the rest of us can barely afford groceries?" The nearby tables had gone quiet, diners turning to watch the unfolding scene with expressions ranging from shock to embarrassment to morbid fascination. From across the restaurant, Marcus had noticed the commotion and was already moving swiftly toward Olivia and Keanu's table, his face a mask of professional concern, hiding genuine alarm. Keanu, for his part, remained surprisingly composed, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "I think there might be a misunderstanding," he began gently, but Olivia was too far gone to be redirected. "No misunderstanding," she countered, lowering her voice slightly but still audibly enough for nearby tables to hear. "I heard you talking about conservative approaches and tax benefits. It's always the same with you people. Charity as a tax write-off, rather than actually supporting policies that would create real change. You get to feel virtuous, while the rest of us struggle." An older woman at a nearby table gasped audibly, while her dining companion shook his head in disapproval. A younger couple exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly uncertain whether to watch or pretend not to notice the confrontation happening mere feet away. "Olivia." Marcus's voice cut through her tirade as he reached the table, his tone carrying a warning that needed no elaboration. "Is there a problem here?" For the first time, Olivia seemed to become fully aware of her surroundings, the staring patrons, the uncomfortable silence that had fallen over this section of the restaurant, and the gentle but unmistakable rebuke in her manager's voice. Reality crashed in, bringing with it the sobering understanding that she had just publicly berated a customer. A famous one, no less, based entirely on assumptions she had drawn from fragments of overheard conversation. "No," she replied stiffly, professional training reasserting itself even as her cheeks flushed with a mix of embarrassment and lingering indignation. "No problem. I was just asking if Mr. Reeves needed anything else." Marcus's expression made it clear he wasn't fooled, but he maintained his professional composure. "Mr. Reeves, please accept our apologies for any disruption to your evening. Your meal and drinks are on the house tonight." "That's really not necessary," Keanu responded, his voice still gentle and lacking any of the outrage or entitlement another celebrity might have displayed in similar circumstances. "There's been no harm done. Sometimes passionate conversations are important, even if their timing isn't ideal." His gracious response only made Olivia feel worse, the kindness undermining her narrative about him more effectively than any argument could have. She stood rigid, service tray clutched to her chest like a shield, unable to look directly at either Keanu or Marcus. "Olivia, please attend to your other tables," Marcus directed firmly. "I'll take care of Mr. Reeves from here." As she turned to leave, burning with humiliation and confused by Keanu's unexpected response, Olivia heard him speak once more. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think we probably agree on more than you might imagine." The simple statement lingered in the air as Olivia walked away, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. The certainty she had felt moments ago was beginning to crack, allowing doubt to seep in. What if she had misinterpreted everything? What if her own biases had created a completely false impression? But there was no time to process these thoughts. Marcus was already gesturing for her to follow him toward the kitchen, his expression making it clear that their conversation would not be pleasant. As conversations around the restaurant slowly resumed, filling the uncomfortable silence with a buzz of speculation, Olivia braced herself for the consequences of her actions, unaware that the most significant revelation was yet to come, one that would completely upend her understanding not just of Keanu Reeves, but of her own place in the bistro's complex ecosystem. The kitchen's swinging door barely muffled the sounds of the restaurant as Marcus guided Olivia through it, his hand firmly but not unkindly on her elbow. The bright fluorescent lighting, after the restaurant's dim ambiance, made her blink, momentarily disoriented as kitchen staff glanced curiously in their direction before quickly returning to their tasks. No one wanted to be caught staring at what was clearly a disciplinary situation in progress. "My office, now," Marcus said, his voice controlled but tight with suppressed anger. It wasn't a request. Olivia followed him silently, her face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and lingering indignation. Part of her recognized she had crossed a professional line, but another part still clung to the righteousness of her perspective. She had spoken truth to power. Wasn't that what she had always believed in? Marcus's office was small but meticulously organized, tucked away in the back corner of the building. He closed the door behind them and gestured for Olivia to sit in one of the two chairs facing his desk. She perched on the edge, her server's apron still tied around her waist, her notepad clutched in one hand. "What?" Marcus began, his voice measured as he took his own seat. "Was that about?" "And before you answer, I want you to think very carefully about your response." Olivia swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. "I was unprofessional," she admitted. "I let personal feelings interfere with my service." "That's putting it mildly," Marcus replied. "You publicly berated a customer based on what? Fragments of overheard conversation, your own assumptions about his politics?" When framed that way, her behavior seemed even more indefensible. Olivia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Olivia, I've overlooked your tendency to judge customers before. The little comments, the slight cooling in your demeanor with certain patrons. I've let it slide because you're one of our best servers otherwise. But this," he gestured toward the dining room, "this crosses every professional boundary we have." "I know," she admitted, her voice smaller now. "I'll apologize to him." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her for a long moment. "Do you even know who that man really is, beyond being Keanu Reeves the actor?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" Marcus reached for a framed photograph on his desk, one Olivia had noticed before but never examined closely. He turned it to face her. In the image, a younger Marcus stood smiling beside a man she recognized as Keanu Reeves, though with shorter hair and no beard. Between them was a third man, older, his arm thrown casually around both their shoulders. "That's Antonio," Marcus explained, pointing to the older man, "the original owner of the bistro, Keanu's friend since they met on a film set nearly 20 years ago." Olivia stared at the photograph, understanding beginning to dawn. They were friends? More than friends. 7 years ago, when the recession hit and fine dining took a nosedive, Antonio was on the verge of losing everything. The bank was ready to foreclose. 3 decades of his life's work was about to vanish. Marcus set the photograph down carefully, his expression softening at the memory. Keanu stepped in. No fanfare, no publicity. He became a silent partner, investing enough capital to not only save the bistro, but to renovate and modernize it. He owns 30% of this restaurant, Olivia. He has for years. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Keanu Reeves owned part of the bistro. The man she had just publicly accused of being disconnected from working people's reality was literally her employer. "He owns," she repeated weakly, unable to form a complete sentence as the implications cascaded through her mind. "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "He owns a significant portion of this restaurant. He pays your salary, well, part of it anyway. And not once in 7 years has he ever made a public statement about it or used it for publicity. Most of the staff don't even know. He visits maybe once or twice a year, usually sits quietly in the corner, tips generously, and leaves without fanfare." Olivia's face had drained of all color. "But he never mentioned it, even when I was—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "That's not who he is," Marcus said simply. "He doesn't flaunt his connections or use his position for special treatment. In fact, he specifically asked us never to acknowledge his ownership when he visits. He wants to be treated like any other customer." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "And that charity event he mentioned? The Foundation for Children's Arts? He founded it, anonymously. It provides arts education to schools in low-income neighborhoods. He funds most of it personally, but raises additional money through these annual events." The conservative approach you overheard him discussing was about how much of the foundation's money to spend immediately versus investing for long-term sustainability. Each word was another nail in the coffin of Olivia's assumptions. The narrative she had constructed about Keanu, about his politics, his values, his disconnect from ordinary people, was collapsing like a house of cards. "I don't understand," she said eventually, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why wouldn't he just tell me all this when I confronted him?" Marcus smiled sadly. "Again, that's not who he is. Keanu doesn't believe in using his wealth or fame to shield himself from criticism or to win arguments. He listens more than he speaks. And frankly, Olivia, would you have believed him? Or would you have seen it as another wealthy person trying to justify their privilege?" The question struck uncomfortably close to home. Would she have believed him? Or would she have dismissed his explanation as self-serving? "I've made a horrible mistake," she acknowledged, her earlier righteousness completely deflated. "Yes, you have," Marcus agreed, but his tone had softened. "The question now is what you're going to do about it." Before Olivia could respond, there was a gentle knock at the office door. Marcus called for whoever it was to enter, and to Olivia's mortification, Keanu Reeves himself stepped into the small space. Up close, in the bright light of the office rather than the dim restaurant lighting, she could see the kindness in his eyes more clearly, and the complete absence of anger or resentment she had expected to find there. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Keanu said, his voice as gentle as it had been in the restaurant. "I wanted to make sure everything was okay before I left." Marcus stood immediately. "Keanu, you don't need to concern yourself with this. We're handling it internally." "I'm sure you are," Keanu nodded. "But I think there might have been some misunderstandings tonight. I wouldn't want anyone to face consequences over what was essentially a communication problem." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. Not only was he not demanding her termination, which would have been entirely within his rights as a co-owner, but he was actually trying to mitigate any punishment she might receive. After she had publicly humiliated him, after she had made sweeping, unfair assumptions about his character and values. "Mr. Reeves," she began, her voice unsteady, "I owe you an apology. I made unfair judgments based on fragments of conversation and my own preconceptions. I was completely unprofessional and I was wrong." Keanu studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than condemning. "We all make judgments based on incomplete information," he said finally. "It's a very human thing to do. The question is what we do when we discover our judgments were mistaken." In that simple statement, Olivia heard no accusation, only an invitation, a chance to learn and grow from the experience rather than be defined by her mistake. The generosity of it, especially after her behavior, was humbling in a way that no reprimand could have been. As she looked between Keanu and Marcus, Olivia realized that the evening had changed something fundamental in her worldview. The neat categories into which she had sorted people, progressive versus conservative, ally versus opponent, good versus bad, suddenly seemed woefully inadequate to capture the complexity of actual human beings. And she wondered how many other times she had been just as wrong, just as quick to judge, without understanding the full picture. The fluorescent lights of Marcus's office cast harsh shadows across the faces of its 3 occupants. Olivia sat perched on the edge of her chair, her server's apron crumpled in her lap, her earlier confidence completely evaporated in the wake of the revelations about Keanu. Marcus leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his expression a mix of disappointment and concern. And Keanu stood by the door, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert and thoughtful as he observed the situation. "I should return to the dining room and check on my other tables," Olivia said finally, breaking the uncomfortable silence. The thought of facing the other patrons after her outburst made her stomach churn, but professional responsibility demanded it. "Actually," Marcus replied, glancing at his watch, "your section has been reassigned. Dominic and Sarah are covering your tables for the rest of the evening." The implication was clear. Her shift was effectively over. Whether this was temporary or permanent remained to be seen, but Olivia felt a fresh wave of anxiety at the uncertainty of her employment status. "Perhaps we could talk," Keanu suggested gently, looking at Olivia. If you're willing. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I can arrange the private dining room if you'd prefer some privacy. That would be appreciated, Keanu nodded. 15 minutes later, Olivia found herself sitting across from Keanu Reeves at a small table in the bistro's private dining area, a space usually reserved for business meetings or intimate celebrations. Her uniform had been exchanged for street clothes, her hair freed from its tight service bun. A pot of tea sat between them, steam rising in delicate curls from two untouched cups. I don't even know where to begin, Olivia admitted, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her teacup. What I did was inexcusable. Perhaps we could start with why, Keanu suggested, his voice lacking any accusation. I'm genuinely curious about what led to that moment. Olivia took a deep breath, considering his question. The easy answer would be to blame exhaustion or stress, but honesty seemed the only appropriate response after everything that had transpired. I made assumptions, she began slowly. I heard fragments of your conversations, noticed your watch, caught certain phrases that seemed to confirm what I already believed about wealthy people in general. I put you in a box before I knew anything real about you. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. We all categorize people. It's a mental shortcut, a way to make sense of a complex world. That doesn't make it right, Olivia countered, surprising herself with her willingness to challenge him even now. I judged you unfairly. A small smile played at the corners of Keanu's mouth. Yes, you did. But I've been judged unfairly many times in my life, from many different directions. It comes with being in the public eye. He paused, taking a sip of his tea before continuing. What interests me more is why those particular assumptions were so emotionally charged for you. There seems to be something deeper there. The observation was surprisingly perceptive, cutting to the heart of something Olivia hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. She considered his question, searching for the root of her reaction. I grew up struggling, she said eventually. My mom worked 2 jobs after my dad left. We lost our house during the recession when I was in high school. She got sick the next year, cancer, and even with insurance, the medical bills nearly bankrupted us. Keanu listened attentively, his expression compassionate but not pitying. I worked my way through college, graduated with a political science degree and dreams of making real change, only to discover that the job market had other ideas. So now I serve expensive meals to people who spend on one dinner what my mom and I lived on for a week. And many of them, not all, but many, talk about politics in ways that make it clear they have no idea what it's like to worry about rent or medical bills or student loans. She paused, suddenly self-conscious. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. It's just context for why I react the way I do sometimes. I appreciate the context, Keanu replied sincerely. And I understand the frustration. Systems often seem designed to benefit those who need help the least, while ignoring those who need it most. His acknowledgement surprised her. It wasn't what she had expected from someone in his position. Can I tell you a story? He asked, refilling their teacups from the pot between them. Olivia nodded, curious despite herself. When I was young, my family moved around a lot. We didn't have much money. My mother raised us as a single parent, working long hours as a costume designer. There were times when we relied on the generosity of others, just to get by. He spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity or dramatization. It was simply his history, shared without expectation of a particular response. Later, when my career began to take off, I found the transition to wealth uncomfortable. Sudden financial security doesn't automatically erase the memories of insecurity. And it can create a strange kind of guilt. Why me and not others? What makes me deserving of this when so many equally talented, equally hardworking people struggle? Olivia found herself nodding along, surprised by how much his words resonated. I've made mistakes, Keanu continued, his voice thoughtful. I've misunderstood situations, judged people incorrectly, spoken when I should have listened. We all have. The question is whether we learn from those moments. He looked directly at her then, his gaze kind but unflinching. Your passion for justice and equality isn't wrong, Olivia. The world needs people who care deeply about these issues, but perhaps the categorization, the assumption that wealth automatically signals certain values, or that political differences make someone an enemy rather than simply someone with a different perspective, might benefit from some reconsideration. The gentle challenge in his words was delivered with such genuine goodwill that Olivia couldn't find it in herself to be defensive. Instead, she felt a surprising sense of relief at being truly seen, her values acknowledged even as her methods were questioned. "I never expected to be getting life advice from Keanu Reeves," she said with a small, slightly embarrassed laugh. His smile widened. "And I never expected to be the subject of a political critique while trying to enjoy some scallops. Life is full of surprises." The shared moment of humor broke the remaining tension between them. Olivia felt her shoulders relax for the first time since the confrontation in the restaurant. "What happens now?" she asked, the question encompassing both her immediate employment situation and the larger implications of the evening's events. "That's partly up to Marcus," Keanu replied honestly. "I won't interfere with how he manages his staff. But for what it's worth, I'll make it clear that I harbor no ill will and would have no objection to your continued employment." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you. I wouldn't have blamed you if you demanded I be fired." "Firing someone for a mistake doesn't create growth or understanding," he said simply. "It just creates unemployment." They talked for nearly an hour more, their conversation moving beyond the immediate situation to deeper discussions of social responsibility, effective activism, and finding common ground across differences. Throughout, Keanu never preached or patronized. He shared his thoughts as someone who had also grappled with these questions, rather than as someone with definitive answers. When they finally emerged from the private dining room, the bistro had closed for the evening. Staff were completing final cleanup, glancing curiously at Olivia and Keanu as they walked together toward the exit. Marcus approached, his expression cautiously optimistic. "Everything resolved?" he inquired, looking between them. "I believe so," Keanu replied with a nod. "Olivia and I have had a good conversation." "I'd like to apologize to you as well, Marcus," Olivia added. "My behavior reflected poorly on the restaurant and put you in a difficult position." Marcus studied her for a moment before nodding. "We'll talk tomorrow about moving forward. For tonight, get some rest." As they reached the door, Keanu turned to Olivia one last time. "Remember, we're all works in progress. The goal isn't perfection, but growth." With those words and a gentle smile, he stepped out into the night, leaving Olivia standing in the doorway of the bistro, watching his retreating figure and reflecting on the unexpected lessons of the evening. What had begun as a simple dinner service had somehow become a profound moment of personal reckoning, an opportunity to examine her own prejudices and perhaps begin the work of moving beyond them. The confrontation that she had initiated out of righteous indignation had not ended with the satisfaction of speaking truth to power, as she might have imagined. Instead, it had humbled her with the realization that truth was often more complex, more nuanced, and more surprising than her preconceptions had allowed. And that perhaps the first step toward the better world she envisioned was not condemning those she perceived as different, but finding the courage to truly see them as they were. The morning after her confrontation with Keanu Reeves, Olivia woke early despite having tossed and turned much of the night. The events at the bistro had replayed in her mind repeatedly. Her misinterpretations, her public outburst, the revelations about Keanu's connection to the restaurant, and their subsequent conversation. Sleep had been elusive as her thoughts churned, with equal parts embarrassment and curiosity. With several hours before her scheduled meeting with Marcus to discuss her employment future, Olivia found herself at her laptop, coffee in hand, searching for information about Keanu Reeves that went beyond his film roles. What she discovered over the next hours both humbled and fascinated her. Unlike many celebrities who carefully curated public personas, Keanu's philanthropy seemed genuinely devoid of self-promotion. There were no foundations prominently bearing his name, no buildings with his moniker emblazoned above the entrance, no splashy press releases announcing his charitable endeavors. Instead, there were scattered reports, often from secondary sources, about anonymous donations to children's hospitals, support for cancer research foundations, and funding for various arts education initiatives, causes that clearly held personal significance given his sister's battle with leukemia and his own journey through the arts. One article detailed how Keanu had taken pay cuts on projects to ensure other actors or crew members could be hired. Another described how he regularly gave up his seat on the subway, chatted respectfully with homeless individuals, and treated film crews with the same courtesy he extended to directors and fellow stars. A Reddit thread collected stories from people who had encountered him in various contexts, all emphasizing his genuine kindness and lack of pretension. Most notably, nearly every account mentioned his reluctance to take credit for his good deeds. When confronted with reports of his generosity, he typically deflected or minimized his contributions. There were no carefully staged photo opportunities at charity events, no social media posts highlighting his philanthropy. In an industry built on visibility and personal branding, Keanu's apparent preference for anonymous giving stood in stark contrast to the norm. Olivia leaned back in her chair, coffee forgotten as she processed this information. It painted a picture dramatically different from the assumptions she had made about him in the restaurant, assumptions based on fragments of conversation and her own preconceptions about wealth and celebrity. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. Meeting pushed to 2 p.m. Take the morning to reflect. The extra time felt like both a gift and a challenge. On impulse, Olivia searched for information about the Foundation for Children's Arts that Keanu had mentioned the previous evening. The organization's website was simple but effective, showcasing artwork and performances by children from underprivileged communities who had benefited from its programs. The About page made no mention of Keanu Reeves, listing instead a board of educators, artists, and community leaders. Only a small note about the foundation being established through an anonymous gift in 2012 hinted at his involvement. As she scrolled through success stories and testimonials, Olivia was struck by one from a young girl in South Central Los Angeles. Before the art program came to our school, no one ever told me I was good at anything. Now I know I have something special to share with the world. The words echoed what Keanu had mentioned at the restaurant about seeing children's faces when they realized someone believed in their potential. He hadn't been reciting a marketing tagline. He had been sharing a genuine memory of impact. Her research continued, moving beyond Keanu specifically to examine the actual effectiveness of arts education in underserved communities. Studies showed significant improvements in academic performance, attendance rates, and socio-emotional development among students with access to quality arts programming. The Foundation's approach of working within existing school structures rather than creating separate programs ensured sustainability and reached students who might otherwise lack transportation to external activities. By the time Olivia left for her meeting with Marcus, her understanding of Keanu Reeves had undergone a profound transformation. The caricature she had constructed of a wealthy, disconnected celebrity using charity as a tax write-off had been replaced by a complex, thoughtful individual whose philanthropy seemed genuinely aligned with addressing systemic inequalities, albeit through different methods than the political activism she had previously considered the only legitimate approach. The bistro was quiet when she arrived, still hours from opening for dinner service. Marcus was waiting in his office, his expression neutral as she took a seat across from him. Before we discuss my continued employment, Olivia began, wanting to address the situation directly, I want to reiterate my apology for last night. My behavior was unprofessional and based on unfair assumptions. Marcus nodded, his expression softening slightly. I appreciate that. And for what it's worth, Keanu made a point of calling me this morning to express his hope that there would be no lasting consequences for you. He did? The gesture of consideration didn't surprise her after what she'd learned, but it still touched her deeply. He did. He also mentioned that your conversation gave him some things to think about regarding his own approach to philanthropy and communication about social issues. Marcus leaned back in his chair. That's a rare quality, Olivia. The ability to learn even when you're the one who's been wronged. I've been doing some research this morning, she admitted, about Keanu, his charitable work, his personal history. It's not what I assumed. People rarely are when we take the time to look beyond our initial impressions, Marcus observed, which brings me to our current situation. I can't simply overlook what happened last night. There need to be consequences for that level of unprofessional behavior. Olivia nodded, bracing herself for termination. So, you'll be on probation for the next 30 days. Any further incidents involving political confrontations with customers will result in immediate termination. Additionally, I'm assigning you to help coordinate our staff's participation in next month's Community Service Day." It took a moment for his words to register. "I'm not fired?" "Not today," Marcus replied, a hint of a smile finally breaking through his serious demeanor. "Keanu sees something worth salvaging in you, and frankly, so do I. You're an excellent server when you're not lecturing the clientele on political economics." Relief flooded through her, followed by determination to prove his faith in her wasn't misplaced. "Thank you. I won't let you down." As she turned to leave, Marcus called after her, "Oh, and Olivia? There's an envelope for you at the front desk." The envelope was simple white stationery, with her name handwritten on the front. Inside was a printed invitation to the Foundation for Children's Arts fundraising event the following evening, along with a handwritten note. "Olivia, if you're interested in seeing what we're trying to accomplish, you're welcome to attend. Sometimes the most meaningful conversations happen when we step outside our comfort zones. No pressure either way. KR double quote." She stared at the invitation, emotions swirling. The Keanu she had imagined would have simply walked away, perhaps ensuring she lost her job on the way out. The real Keanu had not only forgiven her public criticism, but had extended an invitation to learn more, to see for herself the work he was doing. It was a gesture that challenged her in ways no political debate ever had, forcing her to confront not just her assumptions about him specifically, but about the binary thinking that had increasingly shaped her worldview. The notion that people could be neatly categorized as allies or opponents, as part of the solution or part of the problem. As she carefully placed the invitation in her bag, Olivia realized that her education, about Keanu Reeves, about philanthropy, about judgment and reconciliation, was just beginning. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she approached that education not with the certainty that she already knew the answers, but with the humility to recognize how much she still had to learn. Olivia stood hesitantly at the entrance to the Grand Plaza Hotel's ballroom, clutching her small purse like a shield. Despite having chosen her most professional outfit, a simple black dress she normally reserved for job interviews, she felt distinctly out of place among the crowd of well-dressed attendees mingling inside. The Foundation for Children's Arts fundraiser was clearly a significant event, with elegant decorations transforming the space and staff in formal attire, circulating with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. For a moment, she considered turning around and leaving. What had seemed like a meaningful gesture of reconciliation when she received Keanu's invitation now felt like a potential minefield of awkwardness. Would people know who she was? Had the story of her confrontation with Keanu spread beyond the bistro? And most pressing of all, what exactly was she doing here? Before she could retreat, a warm voice interrupted her thoughts. "You came." Turning, Olivia found herself face to face with Keanu Reeves. Gone was the casual attire from the restaurant, replaced by a well-tailored black suit that somehow managed to appear both elegant and understated. His beard had been trimmed, and his hair was neatly styled, but his eyes still held the same gentle kindness she had encountered during their conversation. "I almost didn't," she admitted, opting for honesty. Keanu nodded, seeming to understand her hesitation without requiring further explanation. "I'm glad you did. Would you like an introduction to what we're doing here tonight?" At her nod, he guided her into the ballroom, maintaining a respectful distance while explaining the evening's format. The walls were lined with artwork created by students in the Foundation's programs, vibrant paintings, intricate sculptures, and multimedia pieces that showcased remarkable talent from children as young as 8. The silent auction includes both professional artists who've donated work and selected pieces from our students, Keanu explained, gesturing toward a section where attendees were writing bids on tablets positioned next to each artwork. All proceeds go directly to expanding our programs into more schools. As they walked, Olivia noticed something curious. While some attendees clearly recognized Keanu, there was none of the fawning or excessive attention she might have expected. He was greeted warmly, but treated as a colleague rather than a celebrity. Most people seemed far more focused on the artwork and the cause than on his presence. "Olivia," Keanu said, stopping near a group engaged in animated conversation, "I'd like to introduce you to some of the people who make this foundation work." The introductions that followed challenged Olivia's expectations in ways both subtle and profound. There was Dr. Eleanor Chen, a renowned education researcher who spoke passionately about arts education as a critical component of cognitive development, and who, Olivia soon discovered, had served in a conservative state administration. There was James Wilson, a corporate CEO whose company provided substantial funding to the foundation, who discussed the importance of public-private partnerships in addressing educational inequality, while wearing a lapel pin Olivia recognized from a progressive environmental organization. Most surprising was Maria Diaz, the foundation's program director, who had once worked as a policy advisor in an administration Olivia had vehemently opposed. Yet, as Maria described the foundation's work in underserved communities, Olivia found herself nodding along, unable to find fault with the pragmatic, results-oriented approach that had brought arts education to thousands of children who would otherwise have gone without. "We've found something interesting in our approach," Maria explained as they examined a striking mural created by middle school students from South Central Los Angeles. "When we focus on the shared goal, giving children access to quality arts education, we attract support from across the political spectrum. People who might never agree on tax policy or healthcare can find common ground in wanting children to have creative outlets and opportunities for self-expression." The observation resonated with something Keanu had mentioned during their conversation at the bistro, the idea that meaningful connections often happen when people step outside predetermined categories to focus on specific, tangible goals. As the formal program began, Olivia found herself seated at a table with an eclectic mix of attendees, educators, artists, donors, and community leaders with backgrounds and perspectives that spanned the political continuum. Rather than the superficial small talk she had expected, their conversation was substantive and nuanced, focusing on practical approaches to expanding arts access and measuring outcomes. "Would you be willing to help for a bit?" Keanu asked during a break in the program, appearing beside her chair. "We're a bit short-handed at the student art display, and your experience handling busy situations at the bistro might come in handy." The request surprised her, but Olivia nodded, following him to an area where young artists were scheduled to speak about their work. For the next hour, she found herself working alongside volunteers with political viewpoints she would have previously dismissed outright, coordinating student presentations, answering questions from potential donors, and ensuring the young artists felt supported during their moments in the spotlight. To her surprise, the collaboration was not just manageable, but genuinely rewarding. A retired banker, whose politics she quickly pegged as opposite to her own, proved to be extraordinarily gentle and encouraging with nervous young presenters. A woman wearing a religious symbol Olivia associated with conservative values demonstrated remarkable insight in explaining the technical aspects of various artistic mediums to curious attendees. "Impressive work tonight," commented a voice beside her as the formal presentations concluded. Olivia turned to find Maria Diaz offering her a glass of water. "Keanu mentioned you might be interested in learning more about our outreach programs." "I would," Olivia admitted, surprising herself with the sincerity of her response. "This isn't what I expected." Maria smiled knowingly. "The foundation or the people?" "Both, I suppose," Olivia acknowledged. "I'm used to thinking about social change in more political terms." "Politics has its place," Maria nodded. "But sometimes the most effective change happens in these in-between spaces, where people with different worldviews find something specific they can build together." As the evening wound down, Olivia found herself helping with cleanup alongside a diverse group of volunteers. They worked efficiently together, sharing stories and contact information with a warmth that belied their varied backgrounds. When Keanu joined them, rolling up his sleeves to dismantle display boards and pack up student artwork, he was just another member of the team. No special treatment requested or expected. "What did you think?" he asked Olivia quietly, as they carefully wrapped a delicate sculpture created by a 10-year-old from East Los Angeles. "I think," she replied slowly, considering her words, "that I've been limiting my definition of meaningful action. Seeing people work together across differences that I would have considered insurmountable. It's not something I've experienced before." Keanu nodded, his expression thoughtful. "One of the greatest privileges of my unusual career has been meeting people from virtually every background and belief system. It's taught me that most of us want similar fundamental things: dignity, security, opportunity, meaning, even when we disagree dramatically about how to achieve them." As Olivia prepared to leave, her perspective had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. The binary categories through which she had previously filtered her experiences, progressive versus conservative, ally versus opponent, suddenly seemed inadequate to capture the complexity she had witnessed. People who defied her expectations, collaborations that transcended political divisions, and tangible positive outcomes achieved through focused, practical effort rather than ideological purity. Stepping out into the cool night air, invitation clutched in her hand as a memento, Olivia realized that the evening had offered her not just a glimpse into Keanu Reeves's philanthropic work, but a challenge to her entire approach to social engagement. The world remained full of injustice and inequality, but perhaps the path to addressing these issues was more nuanced, more collaborative, and ultimately more human than she had previously allowed herself to believe. In the weeks following the charity event, the bistro continued its elegant routine of fine dining and excellent service, but subtle changes had begun to take root. Most noticeable was the transformation in Olivia herself. The server who had once mentally categorized patrons based on perceived political leanings now approached each table with genuine openness, finding connection through authentic service rather than ideological assessment. Her experience at the Foundation for Children's Arts fundraiser had lingered with her, prompting reflection on how the principles she had witnessed might translate to her daily work. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, during pre-shift preparations, she approached Marcus with an idea that had been forming since that evening. "Do you have a moment to talk?" she asked, finding him in his office reviewing inventory orders. Marcus glanced up, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. Their relationship had evolved in the aftermath of the Keanu incident. Not quite mentor and mentee, but moving beyond the simple manager-employee dynamic towards something built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "I've been thinking about the bistro," Olivia began once seated, "about the atmosphere we create and the experience we offer guests." "Go on," Marcus encouraged, setting aside his paperwork. "What if we could be more intentional about creating a space where people feel welcome, regardless of background? Not just good service, but a genuine sense of belonging." She hesitated briefly before continuing. "The Foundation event showed me that meaningful connections can happen when people move beyond labels. I wonder if we could foster something similar here." To her surprise, Marcus didn't dismiss the idea as impractical or unnecessary. Instead, he leaned forward, interest evident in his expression. "What exactly are you proposing?" Thus began what the staff would later call the Bistro Initiative, a thoughtful reimagining of the restaurant's approach to hospitality. It started small, with Olivia and Marcus drafting a simple statement of values, emphasizing respect, connection, and the shared experience of breaking bread together. This wasn't about politics or ideology, but about creating an environment where the common humanity of every guest and staff member was recognized and honored. The changes implemented were subtle but meaningful. Training sessions for servers emphasized the art of genuine connection without assumption or judgment. The previously rigid dress code was thoughtfully modified to respect cultural expressions while maintaining the restaurant's elegant standards. The menu evolved to include dishes that honored diverse culinary traditions, each with a small story about its origins and significance. Perhaps most significantly, the bistro began hosting monthly community dinners, evenings when prices were adjusted to welcome guests who might not typically afford fine dining, with a portion of the regular clientele specifically invited to participate not just as patrons, but as community members sharing a meaningful experience. "The economics are tricky," Marcus admitted during one planning session, "but if we structure it correctly, we can make it sustainable, and the goodwill generated extends beyond just those evenings." Olivia, who had initially imagined her role would be limited to suggesting the concept, found herself increasingly central to its implementation. Her political science background, once seemingly irrelevant to her service work, provided unexpected value in navigating the complexities of creating truly inclusive spaces. Her ability to understand different perspectives, now freed from reflexive judgment, helped bridge communication gaps between diverse staff members and patrons. Not everyone embraced the changes enthusiastically. Some regular customers expressed confusion or mild resistance to the evolving atmosphere. A few staff members questioned whether the effort would ultimately benefit the restaurant's bottom line. But as weeks passed and the initiative gained momentum, the results began to speak for themselves. Word spread about the bistro's unique approach, attracting patrons specifically interested in the combination of excellent cuisine and genuine community. Reviews mentioned not just the food and service, but the special quality of the experience, the sense of being truly seen and welcomed rather than merely served. Reservations are up 15%, Marcus informed Olivia one evening, showing her the monthly report. And staff turnover has decreased significantly. People want to be part of what we're building. For Olivia personally, the transformation extended beyond professional satisfaction. Her improved ability to connect with diverse patrons translated to richer conversations, more generous tips, and a growing network of meaningful relationships. Where she had once seen potential adversaries defined by political differences, she now encountered complex individuals with stories, dreams, and values that transcended simple categorization. This shift manifested most visibly during one particularly busy Saturday service, when Olivia found herself assigned to a table of executives whose conversation revealed political viewpoints substantially different from her own. 6 months earlier, such an assignment would have triggered immediate tension and withdrawn service. Now she approached with genuine curiosity, engaging thoughtfully when they asked her opinion on the restaurant's community initiative. "The bistro has taught me that good hospitality means creating space for everyone," she explained, her voice steady and sincere. "When we focus on what connects us, like appreciation for excellent food and meaningful conversation, we often discover unexpected common ground." The executives, impressed by both her service and her perspective, became regular patrons, eventually bringing diverse business associates to experience the bistro's unique atmosphere. One later joined the board of the Foundation for Children's Arts after Olivia made a casual connection to their interest in education reform. "You've found your calling," Marcus observed one evening as they reviewed plans for the upcoming community dinner, "though perhaps not in the way you originally imagined." The comment gave Olivia pause. Her younger self had envisioned making social change through political activism, viewing the restaurant work as merely a stepping stone to real impact. Now she recognized that meaningful transformation often happened in these everyday spaces, in the quality of human connections formed over shared meals, in environments intentionally designed to foster understanding across differences. "The bistro has become a kind of laboratory for the world I want to live in," she replied thoughtfully. "Small scale, certainly, but real." As autumn turned to winter, subtle physical changes began appearing in the restaurant as well. The previously stark separation between kitchen and dining areas softened with the addition of a chef's table, where guests could observe the culinary process and interact with the creators of their meals. The bar area was redesigned to encourage conversation between strangers, with small design elements that gently prompted connection rather than isolation. Local artists, including some students from the Foundation's programs, were invited to display their work, transforming the bistro's walls into a rotating gallery that sparked conversation and supported the community's creative ecosystem. Each piece included not just the artist's name, but a brief story about their journey and inspiration. The cumulative effect was a restaurant that maintained its elegant standards while embodying a more inclusive vision of hospitality, one that recognized dining as not merely consumption, but communion, an opportunity for genuine human connection across the differences that often divided the wider world. During a quiet moment near closing one evening, Olivia found herself thinking of Keanu and their conversation months earlier. The incident that had once been a source of profound embarrassment had transformed into something unexpected, a catalyst for growth, both personal and communal. She wondered if he had any idea of the changes his response to her judgment had ultimately inspired. As if summoned by her thoughts, Marcus approached with a small envelope. "This came for you today," he said, handing it to her with a knowing smile before continuing his closing rounds. Inside was a newspaper clipping, a glowing review of the bistro that specifically mentioned its innovative approach to creating community through culinary excellence. A single sentence was underlined: "The restaurant has become a rare space where genuine connection transcends the divisions of our polarized society." In the margin, a handwritten note read simply, "Growth, not perfection." "Well done," KR double quote. Olivia smiled, tucking the clipping carefully into her apron pocket as she continued her closing duties. The bistro's transformation, and her own, remained works in progress, but they were progressing indeed, one meal and one connection at a time. 6 months had passed since the night Olivia confronted Keanu Reeves at the bistro. Winter had given way to spring, and spring to early summer, bringing with it longer evenings and a natural inclination toward gathering and celebration. The restaurant had flourished under its new approach, becoming known not just for excellent cuisine, but for a unique atmosphere that welcomed diverse patrons and fostered genuine connection. For Olivia, the transformation had been both professional and deeply personal. The server who had once sorted patrons into rigid political categories now approached each table with authentic curiosity and presence. Her tips had increased, her relationships with colleagues had deepened, and perhaps most significantly, her understanding of effective social change had evolved beyond what her younger self could have imagined. The bistro's Thursday evening service was in full swing, the dining room comfortably filled with the gentle hum of conversation and the subtle choreography of servers moving efficiently between tables. Olivia had just delivered a bottle of Cabernet to a celebrating couple when Marcus caught her eye from the host station, a subtle nod indicating she should approach. "Special request for your section," he said quietly when she reached him. "Table 15. Something in his expression, a hint of amusement perhaps, or the ghost of a shared memory, caused Olivia to glance toward the table in question. Her breath caught momentarily as she recognized the man seated there, accompanied by 3 others engaged in animated conversation. Keanu Reeves had returned to the bistro, this time without the cap and beard, making no attempt at anonymity. "Is that?" she began. "His film just wrapped," Marcus confirmed. "Those are his castmates. They specifically requested your section, if you're comfortable with that." The question hung briefly between them, an acknowledgement of history and an opportunity to decline if the memory still carried too much weight. But Olivia merely smiled, straightening her apron with a confidence that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier. "Of course," she replied, already moving toward the table with menus in hand. Keanu looked up as she approached, recognition and warmth in his eyes. "Olivia," he greeted her, as though continuing a conversation rather than resuming one interrupted by months of absence. "I was hoping you'd still be here." "Where else would I be?" she responded with an easy smile, extending her hand in greeting. "Welcome back to the bistro." She was introduced to his companions, a director and 2 fellow actors from his latest project, all treating Keanu with the casual familiarity of colleagues rather than the reverence often accorded to stars. Their conversation flowed naturally, including Olivia not as a servant, but as a valued contributor to their dining experience. "The place has changed," Keanu observed during a pause in the ordering process, his gaze taking in the subtle transformations of the space. The local artwork on the walls, the chef's table where patrons engaged directly with the culinary team, the more diverse clientele clearly comfortable in what had once been an exclusively upscale environment. "For the better, I hope," Olivia replied. "Definitely for the better," he affirmed. "Marcus mentioned you've been instrumental in the evolution." As she served their table throughout the evening, Olivia found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The passionate political science graduate, convinced that social change could only come through ideological battle, had been replaced by a woman who recognized the power of creating spaces where genuine human connection transcended division. The server who had once withheld warmth from those she perceived as ideological opponents now found fulfillment in fostering an environment where diverse perspectives could coexist in respectful engagement. The irony wasn't lost on her that her most meaningful contribution to the values she had always cherished had come not through confrontation, but through hospitality, not through drawing lines, but through intentionally blurring them in service of human connection. Near the end of their meal, as Olivia delivered dessert menus, Keanu asked a question that momentarily caught her off guard. "Do you still volunteer for political causes?" The question was genuine rather than challenging, asked with the same thoughtful curiosity he had demonstrated during their conversation months earlier. Olivia considered it carefully before responding. "I do," she acknowledged. "But differently now. I've found there's value in engaging across differences rather than just within my own echo chamber. Sometimes the most meaningful progress happens in those unlikely conversations. Keanu nodded, seeming to understand precisely what she meant. Bridges rather than barriers. Exactly, she agreed, the simple phrase capturing the essence of her evolution. Later, as the group prepared to leave, Keanu lingered at the table after his companions had stepped outside. From his jacket, he withdrew a small envelope similar to the one that had contained the invitation to the Foundation event months earlier. The Foundation for Children's Arts is expanding, he explained, handing it to her. We're opening a new center in the neighborhood where you grew up. Marcus mentioned the connection. We're looking for board members with both passion for the cause and the ability to connect with diverse stakeholders. Your experience here at the bistro suggests you might have valuable perspective to offer. Olivia accepted the envelope, momentarily speechless at the unexpected opportunity. I'm not sure I'm qualified, she admitted. 6 months ago, you challenged me about the disconnect between charity and systemic change, Keanu reminded her. That critique, though perhaps delivered more forcefully than needed at the time, he added with a gentle smile, wasn't without merit. Effective philanthropy requires diverse perspectives, including those willing to ask difficult questions about sustainable impact. As he rose to join his waiting companions, Keanu paused, his expression thoughtful. Sometimes, our most valuable contributions come from our willingness to evolve beyond our initial understanding. Your journey these past months is proof of that. After he had gone, Olivia remained briefly at the empty table, the envelope in her hands representing a future she couldn't have anticipated, one that somehow honored both her original passion for meaningful social change and the more nuanced understanding she had developed through her experiences at the bistro. The restaurant continued around her, servers delivering plates and clearing tables, patrons engaged in conversations spanning everything from business deals to family celebrations to philosophical debates. In this ordinary yet extraordinary setting, people who might never connect elsewhere found common ground through the shared experience of breaking bread together. And isn't that, Olivia reflected, where real change begins? Not in grand political gestures or ideological victories, but in these small human moments of genuine connection across difference, connections that slowly, gradually transform how we see one another and the world we share. That evening, after closing, Olivia found herself alone in the bistro, completing final preparations for the next day's service. Standing in the center of the dining room, she took a moment to appreciate the space and its significance in her life's journey. What had begun as a job, a temporary means to an end while she pursued her real calling, had become something unexpected, a laboratory for the very values she had always held most dear. The confrontation with Keanu had initially seemed like her most humiliating failure, yet through his unusual response, offering understanding rather than condemnation, curiosity rather than judgment, that moment had transformed into a catalyst for growth beyond anything she could have imagined. As she prepared to leave, Olivia's gaze fell on a new addition to the bistro's entryway, a simple framed quote that had become something of a motto for the restaurant's evolution. True hospitality transcends transaction. In welcoming the stranger as friend, we create not just meals, but meaning. The words, anonymous to most patrons, had actually originated in her conversation with Keanu months earlier. Now they stood as a quiet testament to the journey they had both undertaken. He, in finding value in her challenge despite its delivery, and she, in discovering that meaningful change often comes through channels we least expect. Outside, stars punctuated the summer sky as Olivia locked the bistro's door behind her. Tomorrow would bring new patrons, new conversations, new opportunities to create the kind of world she had always envisioned. One connection at a time, one meal at a time, one moment of genuine human understanding at a time. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, that in a world increasingly divided by ideology and identity, the revolutionary act might not be drawing harder lines, but creating spaces where lines temporarily dissolve, allowing us to recognize our shared humanity before the differences that so often define us. For viewers watching this story unfold, the message extended beyond the specific characters and their journey. We all face moments of judgment, of assumption, of categorizing others based on fragments rather than fullness. We all encounter opportunities to respond to criticism with either defensiveness or curiosity, to meet difference with either distance or engagement. In those moments, we stand where Olivia and Keanu stood, at the crossroads of reaction and response, of entrenched position and potential growth. And the choices we make in those moments, however small they might seem, ripple outward in ways we can rarely anticipate, shaping not just our individual paths, but the shared spaces we inhabit together. This story, born in confrontation and culminating in collaboration, invites us to consider what might be possible if we approach one another not as categories, but as complex individuals, each carrying stories and values worthy of curious engagement rather than quick dismissal. It challenges us to create more bistros in our world, spaces where genuine connection transcends the divisions that so often define our larger society. Where are you watching from today? And what connections might be possible in your own life if judgment were replaced with curiosity, if reaction were transformed into response? The table is set, the invitation is open, and the potential for transformation, personal and communal, awaits.